What is going on, guys, and welcome back to the third episode of Six Spoke Studios. Today we're going to be talking about the best camera to get if you want to get into car photography or simply want to start a YouTube channel. Hopefully you guys enjoy this podcast episode, and let's get started. So before we start off today's video, I'm going to go ahead and give you guys a couple of key terms just so you guys are fully aware of what I'm talking about. Because the thing I hate about watching a video is when the person's going on and you have no idea what they're talking about. And I hate that. So I'm going to go ahead and make this as dummy proof as possible so everybody can understand what I'm talking about. Nobody's lost. And I'm going to try my best. So bear with me. So for today's podcast episode, we're going to be talking about two different cameras. First one's going to be the DSLR cameras, and the second one is my personal favorite, mirrorless cameras. Now, DSLRs, I'm not going to talk about too much. The only reason I'm even bringing them up was because my first camera was a DSLR. So I don't have a DSLR with me, but I'm going to go ahead and use my Sony camera as an example. A DSLR basically stands for digital single lens reflect. Basically, the dummy way of explaining that is when you take a look at a DSLR, when you look inside the viewfinder, you're basically looking into a tiny mirror built in. Every time you look, that mirror will reflect out into the lens, and that's what you're seeing. Now, when you take the picture, that mirror is going to flip up, expose the sensor, and then take the picture. But as you guys can see, a mirrorless camera doesn't have it, and you're looking right at the sensor. Now, there's a lot of advantages to a mirrorless camera and a DSLR, and I'll explain both of them in a second. The advantage of a DSLR is you're getting kind of a natural look. So when you're looking into that mirror, you're basically seeing what your eye is seeing. You take the picture. Later on, you can go ahead and edit that picture. So one of the bigger disadvantages to a DSLR, actually, and this is the reason why I don't use them as much, is because since you're looking into a mirror, if you make any changes to the camera, that picture quality or that picture that you see later on may not be the same of what you actually took. That's why I like using mirrorless cameras, because it makes it a lot simplified. So what you see in the viewfinder is what you're actually taking, because it'll actually change the settings of the camera and it'll change that picture inside that little screen that's built in. And like I said, my first camera that I actually got, and this is a huge shout out to the homie from Lewis because he actually sold it to me, was a Canon T5. Really great camera for what I needed it for. Obviously, I was just using it for photography back in the day. But as soon as I started getting into video, I realized that I needed something a little bit better. And that's where Sony came into play. Now, if you guys are looking into getting into the photography game, you don't want to spend too much money. You want a great camera, something lightweight, not too heavy, but still maintains full resolution as some of these bigger DSLRs. Sony A6000 is a great option to get into, and that's actually the first camera that I got from Sony. That's the second camera I've ever owned. Really great camera to have if you want to do photography, because the cool thing about all the Sony cameras is whether you're looking at their A6000, which is kind of one of their base models, or you're looking at something bigger like their A7 III, all the lenses between each camera are interchangeable. And that's a big deal, especially in the photography world, because not only does a camera make a big impact on what kind of pictures you're taking, but the lens itself makes an even bigger impact. So both go hand in hand together. And with any of the Sony cameras, they all use what's called the E-mount lens. And whether, like I said, whether you're using their base model or the professional model, you can interchange lenses between all of their models. And the lens I actually have on my A7 III, which is a full frame camera, is actually a lens that I've actually used to use with my A6000. The only disadvantage to an A6000 is there's no flip up screen, so you can't see yourself when you're recording. There's no microphone input, and you can't record in 4K. But that's where the next model, and that's actually the other model that I'm currently using right now, and this is actually I'm using to record the podcast, is the Sony A6100. Now that one can pretty much do everything that the Sony A6000 can, but just a lot better. So with the Sony A6100, it actually implemented the flip up screen, so now you can see yourself when you're recording. It added the option for an external microphone, and it added the 4K recording. They also did improve their autofocusing. They went from 193 focusing points to 460, I think 68, which is a huge improvement. So autofocusing is laser fast on the A6100. So really good if you're taking action pictures, or say for example, you're taking a roller shot. Chances are the photo's at least going to be in the frame. Whereas with something like the A6000 or even like a DSLR, they tend to have a lot slower autofocusing. So when you're trying to record a picture that's very high or very high action or really fast going, chances are you might miss the picture sometimes because your picture goes out of focus. The price on this does jump up significantly. So you're talking about like a $500-$600 for the A6000, where the A6100 you're now looking about like $900 to $1,000 plus. If you guys are looking for an alternative and you don't mind switching over to Canon, well, you have the M50. The Canon M50 is probably one of the most popular vlogging cameras out there. It's just like the A6000. It's located around the $600 price point, but it offers a lot of what the A6100 has. So you do get the flip out screen. You can view yourself. You get the external microphone option, and you also get the ability to record in 4K. But here's the thing about the M50. And this is why I actually didn't buy it as opposed to getting the A6000. The M50 uses a lens mount called EFM, whereas the rest of the Canon cameras use EF lenses. And that makes it a lot more difficult to kind of interchange lenses between one model to another, because if you want to use other Canon lenses, you do have to buy that adapter. And that adapter is going to cost you roughly around $200. That's right, you heard that right, $200. Whereas the Sony cameras, whether, like I said, you have their base models or their full frame, you can pretty much interchange lenses between all of them. Now, the other option is if you want to spend a little bit more money, have a more professional style camera, A7 III is a very good option to go with. Now, what makes this so special, and actually I'm going to tell you guys a price point for this. This roughly right now, if you were to go buy in store, is going to cost you $2,400. It's an expensive camera, but in my personal opinion, it's well worth it. Now, what makes this different between something like the A6000, A6100? Why does this jump up $1,000? Well, this camera is actually considered what's called a full frame camera, where the rest of the cameras like the A6000, the 6100, even the M50, they're considered crop sensors. Now, when you take a look at the sensor on the inside of the camera, you'll notice how big that is. That's actually considered a 35 millimeter sensor, whereas the other cameras use something a lot smaller. Basically, how that affects your pictures and videos is with the full frame, you get a lot more low light. You get more possibilities to choose lenses, and you get a better dynamic range in terms of colors and lighting. And here's what I mean about different lens options, because I know at the beginning I was saying that with Sony cameras, you can use all their lenses and all the cameras and still get the same picture quality. And that's true to an extent. So there's two things you look for in the lens. It's the focal length and the f-stop. So on this one, since it is a 30 millimeter, basically what focal length means, it's kind of a calculation of the distance on where the image is going to be the sharpest. The bigger number the focal length is, the more zoomed in it's going to be, and the more you're going to get in picture, and the sharper the image is going to be on an object that's a little bit further away. Whereas the smaller the focal length number, like say for example, if this were like a 10 millimeter focal length, the wider that image is going to be, so you don't have to stand as far back to get more in image. The other thing you need to look into is the f-stop. So have you guys ever seen a picture where the background is super blurry? Well, that's because their f-stop is a smaller number. So if we take a look at this one, for example, this one can go down all the way to 1.8, which will give me a lot of blurriness in the background. The cool thing about having a lower f-stop too is you get a lot more light in the picture, so you can actually get into a darker environment and not have to worry about having too much light in it. Whereas if the number were higher, a lot more is going to be an image, so the background's not going to be as blurry, but in a darker scenario, chances are you might need to turn a little bit more light on. Now, at the end of the day, what does this all mean? Like, we've talked about cameras, we talked about some of the differences, what they will do, we talked about some of the lenses, how it kind of functions, but how does this like help me choose what camera I want? Well, if you guys are looking to get into car photography, if you guys don't want to spend too much money, highly suggest looking into the A6000. If you want to get into the Sony line, if you want to save money but still get a couple of more options that the A6000 can offer, highly suggest looking into the M50. Like I said, that's a great camera to start off with, but the only thing is, if you want to buy more options in terms of lenses, you do have to buy that adapter, which is around $200. If you have a little bit of money to play around with and you want to have a better Sony camera, I highly suggest the A6100, because like I was mentioning before, you get the flip out screen, you get the microphone input, 4K, and then on top of that, more autofocusing points. So very good camera to consider, and it's a very good option, but you are looking around like the $800 to $1,000 price point. And then if you have unlimited money, say for example, your dad's the godfather, and you know he's going to give you just as much money as you want, you're going to consider the A7 III. That's a very good camera to go with. If you want to get into professional size, that is also full frame. In terms of lenses, I highly suggest starting off with the stock lens that the camera will come with. Get used to that, see how you like it. That way, after that, you can kind of decide on which route you want to take. If you want to have a lot more, in the picture, highly suggest getting something a little bit wider. So I would suggest something like a 35 millimeter, a 24 millimeter, or even possibly a 16 millimeter, which I've used in the past. If you want to get more blurriness in the background, if you want the objects that are further back to be closer to you without having you stand so close, look into a longer lens like an 85 millimeter. If you want a lens that's all good all around, I would suggest looking into the 24 to 70 millimeter lens. So photography isn't too hard. It's just a little bit of a learning curve, learning what everything means. Like I said, once you kind of get used to a camera and know what it means, everything else comes kind of second nature after that. When you first start off with a camera, highly suggest to leave it in the auto mode because that's going to make it super easy for you guys. The camera's going to do all the work. You guys don't have to do anything really, just besides the composure of how you want the picture to be set up. Later on, when you want to get more into it, you can kind of start playing around with some of these other settings on here, and the camera will kind of tell you what it means. And then that kind of gives you a little bit of a better understanding how to work the camera. Later on, if you guys want to get into the full professional mode, you can go into manual mode and basically change everything in the image. And like I said, each camera is good in their own ways. Obviously, I'm a big Sony person. I love using Sony cameras because of how easy it is to interchange lenses. Started off with their base one, now much more their professional level. So good series if you want to get into photography, even video. If you want to get into the DSLR side, a couple of recommendations that I can give you guys is the Canon T7, the Canon T8, or if you want a bit of a higher model DSLR, I believe it's like the Canon 80D or even the Canon 5D. Those are kind of some options to look into. Or the ESOR from Canon as well is another good mirrorless camera. That's kind of the equivalency to the A7 III. If you want to look in the Nikon 3500 or the 5600, if not the Nikon Z6, I think that's what it's called, is there a mirrorless camera for them? Really good option and to look into if you want to go with Nikon. Like I said, at the end of the day, whichever route you go, just make sure you're fully aware of what you're buying. Like I said, I kind of started off with something small, later on worked my way into some of the higher end models. Another good option actually consider too, if you kind of want to start off, if you just want to do kind of YouTube and YouTube only, not photography, look into a GoPro because a GoPro is very versatile. I've actually owned a couple of GoPro models. I've owned the Hero 5, the Hero 7. I'm actually on the Hero 9 right now, which is their newest model. Served me well, very good, very easy to use, and don't require too much of a learning curve. But you still get a lot into the picture because you can actually adjust the camera itself. At the end of the day, guys, just have fun with it. Make sure, like I said, you're fully aware of what you're buying, though, because when you go into a store and you buy a camera, chances are nowadays they have restocking fees. So basically what that means is if you want to return the camera after you've used it, the store will charge you a little bit of money because that's their way of making sure that people aren't just buying you cameras for like their events and then returning them the next day. So this is something I do have to clarify because it's a big misconception, is just because you have a really expensive camera does not mean it's going to be the best of the best. I've taken a lot of pictures on my A6000 that people have complimented that I really liked that have been on my, base model A6000, whereas I've taken some pictures on the A7 III that I don't like, or still look good, but I could have easily taken that with the A6000. So if you want to get into the photography game, I highly suggest to start off with something small. If you want to get into YouTube, I highly suggest looking into the M50 or the A6100. Other than that, guys, that's pretty much it going to be for today's podcast video. If you guys enjoyed it, make sure to give it a thumbs up. Stay tuned for next week. I'm going to try to get a guest star next week, so that way it's not just me talking to a microphone and looking at myself into a camera all the time, and just to give you guys a better variety. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Hopefully you guys enjoyed, and see you in the next one.